A top Israeli official says that wiping out Hamas will require at least another 7 months of fighting in Gaza, despite growing calls around the world for a ceasefire. Today, we're getting a new look at some of the devastation following that deadly Israeli airstrike in Rafah. A camp for displaced Palestinians was hit, killing at least 45 people, injuring some 200 others. Those stats, according to the Palestinian Ministry of Health. Most of the victims, apparently women and children. A CNN analysis of video obtained from the scene reveals the munitions used in the deadly strike were made in the United States. 4 explosive weapons experts who reviewed the video said it showed the tail of a U.S.-made small-diameter bomb, a GBU-39. And for the first time, video that's been geolocated by CNN and recorded today shows 2 IDF tanks moving further west into Rafah. We want to discuss with the former Israeli ambassador to the United States, Michael Oren. Ambassador, thank you so much for being with us. Do you believe Israel's initial explanation about this Rafah attack, that it was a precise attack, but that it may have unintentionally set off weapons stored nearby?
Good to be with you, Boris. Of course I believe it. The Biden administration also believes it. The Biden administration requested that Israel use the smallest possible caliber munitions, the most precisely guided munitions. The GBU-39 is the smallest such bomb in the Israeli Air Force's arsenal to target Hamas leaders. And that's precisely what Israel did. And so there's an investigation now about how this horrendous fire occurred. And it is horrendous. It's a terrible, nightmarish event. That goes without saying. But the 2 Hamas operatives were 200 yards away from that camp. And for a fragment from one of those bombs to travel that distance and set up that type of explosion is highly suspicious. Right now, there's a strong feeling in the Israeli army that there was a Hamas munitions depot underneath that encampment, and that possibly caused the explosion.
Ambassador, Netanyahu described this as a costly mistake. I'm wondering how you read the Biden administration's handling of this latest purported mistake, because this is now a string of deadly mistakes that the IDF has made since October. Not only the killing of aid workers, but the killing of hostages that were being held by Hamas. And how much stock do you put into Biden's red line?
Well, let me just say this. I'm an old combat veteran, and usually in war, 20% of all casualties on our side or on any army side are from friendly fire. And we've had a tremendous number of Israeli soldiers killed by our own fire, because this is an immensely a complex war in a densely built-up area where terrorists do not wear uniforms. They dress as civilians. They mix in with the civilian population. So, yes, terrible, terrible mistakes do occur. And the victims of those mistakes are not just aid workers and civilians, but also Israeli soldiers themselves. And as you mentioned, hostages who managed to escape. It's brutal, a fair war on any conditions. And in Gaza, it's almost indescribable. I think that the Biden administration was very express in saying to Israel what its expectations were regarding the Rafah operation, that it not be a major incursion, certainly as rockets continued to fire on Tel Aviv, fired from Rafah, any other army, any other country would simply go in there and level the place. Israel's not doing that. It's going in a very measured way and using these small caliber precision munitions, which the Biden administration requested that Israel use. So Israel is abiding by all of the requests of the Biden administration. So if there's a red line out there, the red line would be, I would imagine, a major incursion into Rafah using much larger caliber weapons.
I'm curious about that distinction, because a major ground offensive in Rafah, you already have tanks. Our cameras captured tanks going in there. Do you have faith that the IDF is actually going to follow that advice from the White House and not cross that red line and not send more troops and more military equipment into that area?
Well, 2 tanks do not a major incursion make. Let's be very careful about that. Israel has hundreds and hundreds of tanks. And while there may be a buildup of forces around Rafah and other places in Gaza, I think there's a deep desire on the part of Israelis to conclude the Gaza campaign generally as soon as possible, because Hezbollah continues to fire dozens of rockets at the north every single day, and 60,000 Israelis remain displaced. The entire northern part of the country is uninhabitable. And Hezbollah is a much greater threat than Hamas. Hezbollah is a strategic threat that really could threaten Israel's fundamental security. So Israel wants to conclude that Gaza operation as soon as possible, but also wants to stay on the right side with the Biden administration. And I think there's tremendous pressure on the Israeli government to actually order a much larger operation into Rafah as those missiles continue to fall on Tel Aviv shot from Rafah. I mean, what would the United States do in a situation?
I hate to cut you off, but respectfully, I wonder where you draw that assessment that you believe that Israel wants to follow the advice of the United States when Benjamin Netanyahu has essentially said that he is going to see this war through to whatever extent it needs to go to finish Hamas, despite what the United States has told him about the death and the killing of innocent civilians.
Well, to the best of my knowledge, Boris, the Biden administration still signs on to Israel's war goals of destroying Hamas. I don't think that's changed at all. I think there are differences of opinion about the morning after scenario, and I think Israel could do much more to meeting the Biden administration's expectation there. There are disagreements about the long-term peace process. I think, again, Israel could go further to meeting the Biden administration's wishes there. But the fundamental goals of the war remained unchanged. And this is not Netanyahu's war. Hamas didn't attack Bibi Netanyahu. Hamas attacked the people of Israel. The people of Israel are very firmly behind the continuation of the war to remove the threat of Hamas. Again, as rockets continue to fall on our communities, it's not as if Hamas has been eliminated in any way. There will be debate in Israel over whether Israel should agree to a temporary ceasefire, not a permanent ceasefire, in return for the release of a certain number of hostages. They're going to debate about the number of hostages that we would accept, the number of Palestinian terrorist prisoners to be released from our jails in exchange for those hostages. There'll be debates. I believe, and I'm not a spokesman for the government, Boris, I believe that if Hamas were to put a realistic proposal on the table for the release of hostages in return for a temporary ceasefire, I think that Israel would accept it.
It just does seem that there has been a disconnect between the White House and the Israeli government, specifically with Netanyahu, over the deaths of civilians. And to hear that you think that there's accord between the two, it just seems different than what has been said publicly.
Well, I don't disagree with you. There's been tremendous criticism from Washington about Israel's conduct of the war and the issue of civilians. And Israel is replied is that the numbers published by Hamas are not only inflated, they include the number of terrorists we've killed. It includes the number of people who just die of natural causes in Gaza. It includes the number of Palestinians who are killed by the roughly 12% of Palestinian rockets that fall short and kill hundreds of Palestinians. If you deduct all that, you get close to one combatant death for every one civilian death. And every civilian death, by the way, is a tragedy. It's one civilian death too many. But compared to any other modern conflict, including the United States' involvement in Iraq, Afghanistan, and Syria, where the ratio was 4 civilians to every combatant death or 9 civilians to every combatant death, that is a record that's not been matched by any other army in history, including the United States military. So we're going to have an issue with the Biden administration about those numbers. But at base, I think the goals of the war remained unchanged, destroying Hamas, assuring that October 7th can't happen again.
I think we should point out that the White House has assessed that those numbers historically have been fairly accurate coming from the Palestinian Ministry of Health. Nevertheless, Ambassador Michael Oren, we have to leave the conversation there. We do appreciate your time. A new hour of CNN News Central starts right now.